Please be seated. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Grace and peace to you, dear brothers and sisters in Christ. And ufta. That's all we can go with on this one, right? We all have these events in our lives where we go into not quite prepared for. For many, it is a test that we didn't study quite enough for. Most parents come into parenthood feeling very unprepared. As parents who just had a kid turn 18, oh my goodness, somebody should have warned me, because yesterday was rough. Your kid turning 18 and becoming an adult when you didn't give them permission? It's awful. And we're graced by a very good kid. Other times we think we have prepared only to arrive and realize we are not. For me, this happens every time that we pack for vacation. I don't know how prepared most people get for vacations. But with kids, I spend so much time coming up with the categories of what we might need to take and how much, and then I begin to pack. I anticipate needing 12 outfits for 3 days. Y'all do it too, don't even. And the kicker is, often, even when we think we have prepared enough, it isn't the case. We may have very well packed enough for a sunny beach vacation with temps in the 90s, only to arrive and find that it is going to be rainy and windy, and your clothes aren't going to work. Or maybe you've planned for a 4-day ski vacation, and thanks to Mother Nature and road closures, you were stranded there for a few more days. I can vividly remember taking our 2 girls to Disneyland. And no, it did not go as planned. Picture, if you will, taking 2 young girls, pretty sure they were 4 and 2, for 5 days of rides and adventures. Only for about a day and a half in, Addison comes down with a stomach bug. Full-on fever, needing buckets for nearby puking adventures. Needless to say, I was not prepared for a baby being sick in Disneyland. But luckily, Target was nearby. And so much of the next 24 hours was spent with adults taking shifts with Addison in the hotel, while others went and had fun. But one by one, we all came down with that same bug. And it continued until our very last day, when everyone we thought was feeling better, and Michaela, our oldest, had magically escaped this. Yeah, no. She got sick while we were exiting a ride. As much as we might try to prepare, we can never know how life is going to go. And what matters really is how we handle the challenges and the swifts and swings of life. We have to hope and have hope as to how things will turn out. Because otherwise, if we just plan and we get upset because life doesn't go the way we wanted, it's not going to go so great. Too many times in life, we lack the preparation as we move into something important and significant. How many of us have had to deal with death when we weren't ready for it? We often experience a scrambling for papers and documents, trying to find things that weren't written down or simply are just not there. And yeah, if you're squirming in your seat, I get it. It's not fun. But that's what Jesus is telling us today. When we don't do the planning and the preparation, those around us are left to do it for us. And I know it is not a subject that any of us want to talk about or tackle. I know for myself, I don't love having to make the decisions and choices or have the talks. But nonetheless, they are no less important or needed. It is scary to admit that choices to be made about who would raise children in our absence, or what to do with our belongings and assets, or how the end of our lives may look, are scary. But to look ahead is what we need to do, in order so that we can look back and see how Jesus prepared for the end of Jesus' life. In today's gospel, we hear just this. We see how Jesus prepared not only himself, but those around him for the imminent end of his life as he knew it. And so we too are called to prepare. We prepare so those around us don't have to do it alone. We prepare because we do not want to force others around us to discern for us after we are gone. For some, this means making a will, getting our affairs in order, and making sure documents are in places where they can be found. When we fail to prepare advanced medical directives, we leave those around us forced to make the decisions about our lives, trying to find a sense of what we might actually want. Without saving for the cost of death, we are forcing others to pay the cost for us. And what I want us to challenge us all with is, in preparing, it can also look like sharing that which is important to us with those who we hold dear. Share the stories of things that have touched your life, who made you who you are today. Share things that made you struggle. When we fail to do this, we are taking a chance that we will never share aloud all the things that are most important with us to the people that are most important to us. Jesus says this in John 12. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Pastor Steve Holmes tells us this is faith and resurrection. It is not some speculation on the future, but to trust is to die in love. And this is what we are going to hold on to this morning. Jesus' trust and his openness to dying in love. To understand this passage, we have to understand a few key parts. In the gospel today, we hear in John that Jesus was being approached by the Greeks. Let's be honest. The Greeks went to Philip, who went to Andrew, and Andrew to Jesus. In reality, they had our tradition of committees down to a pat. The Greeks and the disciples also understood the pecking order. Nonetheless, the Greeks wanted to see Jesus. The idea of the Greeks wanting to see Jesus is something interesting for us. They just showed up. They are outsiders trying to find their way in, and we have no idea what they're hoping to find. Odds are they had heard stories about Jesus and they were curious. Possibly they were trying to find a spiritual longing that they felt. Just as simply as we don't know what the Greeks were hoping to find, they still showed up. How many of you this morning woke up and knew what you were coming to church for? Yeah, we all just come because we want to be community. We're searching for something, and not always do we have the name of what we're looking for. It would be nice to think they heard about glory and grace and the cross. Glory for them, and us even, if we're being honest, is easiest to hear. Who wouldn't be attracted to the idea of glory? But the cross, suffering, that's not an attractive concept for anyone. But it's certainly a real one. As horrible as it is when we hear that a loved one is suffering, knowing that God suffered on the cross for us, that is our glory, folks. That is to know that no matter what you've ever done, thought, or been, you are saved from that. In John chapter 11 was a convenient place to pause because it ends with the first major section of the book, that is of Jesus' public ministry. Beginning in chapter 13, Jesus chooses his disciples exclusively. Chapter 12 serves as our transition. It moves us from the public teachings of Jesus, from the miracles and signs and passion, to a great sign, to the resurrection. It gives us that movement forward. And Jesus uses chapter 12 as a teaching moment. Jesus doesn't go right where we might have expected him to go. Instead of a sermon of grace and bringing people to him, he uses it as imagery of the grains to show what his death will mean to him, to those around him, and to us today. What we need to pay attention to, dear siblings, is far more than what the Greeks may have gotten out of Jesus, but rather what the Greeks represent to us and to Jesus. Jesus, despite his human fear expressed in the Garden of Gethsemane and in today's Gospel's reading, that he had no intention of stepping aside from the onrushing events that would lead to his death, and also to his Father's glory. In all the Gospels, there comes a point where Jesus, knowing the fate that awaits him, nevertheless sets his face towards Jerusalem and will not be detoured. The dying of a grain stands for the abundance of life. And here in John's Gospel, Jesus recognizes the arrival of the Greek speaking converts as a sign as the time of the glorification of God on the cross is coming near. This is where his mission and ministry have been heading all along. The die is cast, and Jesus very clearly states that he will not step aside. Though he has free will and freedom of action from all that awaits him, Jesus acknowledges that the fact that he will die and prepares the people around him for this fact. Jesus is using the idea of rain falling on the earth and dying as embodiment of the community arising. The grain is a metaphor for the community life of the community of faith. When the grain dies and opens up, the community is opened up and renewed. So for the Greeks to see Jesus, they have to see it through the grain dying and community rising and being new. They have to remember that God is not glorified by imposing a death sentence on Jesus. God is glorified by Jesus himself, who is not looking to get something for himself. See, Jesus could have said to the Greeks, "Let me show you how to get yours in this world. There's a bunch of suckers in this world," but Jesus didn't go that direction. Instead, Jesus goes the direction of using a grain because a grain would have made more sense to them. And instead, he shares this with them. Jesus walks this path out of the communion with God. It is not forged through morbid, mud-soaked process, but forged by giving one's life, that all might be drawn into love. He is trying to draw all into a community built solely out of love. Jesus does this out of longing for oneness and fullness. What happens when hope is drawn out of the dying? The cross of Good Friday is not the last page. Easter Sunday comes and hope will emerge. And that is the movement of God's action of love. No stipulations. In fact, if we look back at the Greeks, we see that Jesus uses the word cosmos. When Jesus looked at his death, that is the kind of love that he sees. So unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Not for one thing, but for the whole world. And after we see Jesus in a very human form, after telling about how the end of his life will come, he withdraws. He is emotionally drained, so he departs and hides. Even Jesus needed space. And you have to love this part where we get to be with Jesus in a human form. He tells them he needs some time. And honestly, I think if we're true with ourselves, we all try to hide from death at some point. Rob Bell talks about the holy word, or the word holy, and in fact his translation of holy is hadashka, meaning unique, distinct, sacred, and set apart as only one of its kind. And Bell asserts that in life there are these times and places where we have to draw a circle around something and hold it as holy. In the times where we are emotionally drained, we need to remember holy, 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 or hadashka, hadashka, hadashka. Jesus took the time. Because remember, we all live in the entitlement of being healthy and expectations that we will wake up tomorrow and we will all be good. But there are people in this very room whose lives are not always healthy. And we need to let go of our falseness that everything is good. There is a part of each of us that has to die to the idea that tomorrow will just be tomorrow, and we will be as healthy as we are now. There are things that no longer exist, and something new grows forth. It's a hard fact for us as humans to take. But as we are entering into the ending of our Lenten journey, I ask, how have we grown? What have we let go of? And what are we taking on? Just as Jesus prepared the disciples for the ending, and as we are getting into the ending of our Lenten service in season, what have we let go of? And what are we taking on? And how do we need to pay more attention to it? Amen.